Today we're going to step back in time all the way to 1912. The story we're covering is not a whodunit. We know exactly who did it, and he confessed almost immediately. This is a story about the why and the how. It's a harrowing look at a cycle of domestic abuse in an era when the system offered very little protection. It's a story of red flags that were seen but ultimately couldn't stop a predictable and explosive tragedy. This is the case of Ozla and Samuel Ron. Ozla Elizabeth Ron was born Ozla Elizabeth Jones in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on June 28, 1893. She was the daughter of Charles Jones and Minnie Jones. She had one brother. Ozla had previously sang in the choir at Ryland, but quit since she had always had to return home late at night after the rehearsals. In 1911, Ozla met a young soldier named Samuel Ron, who was serving in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. She quickly fell in love with him and promised to marry him once he was discharged. The two were married on September 1, 1911. However, their marriage almost immediately took a dark turn. Samuel was abusive towards Ozla on numerous occasions. While they were on their honeymoon in Chicago, he threatened her, who had him arrested. However, a judge released Samuel after he swore it was a one-off and that he would never hurt her again. Ozla also decided let it go. The couple returned to D.C. that January and lived in a house with one of Ozla's aunts. Since Samuel didn't have a job, the couple sent a letter to Ozla's aunts, asked for a $50 loan. They received the loan. On February 2, 1912, Samuel choked his wife senseless. Ozla reported him for assault. Samuel turned himself in and told the police, "I guess you better lock me up, for I may hurt that girl." Samuel was arrested, convicted of assault, and given the choice to either pay a $25 fine or serve 60 days at the Occoquan workhouse. Unable to pay the fine, Samuel asked his younger brother, John Ron, to pay it for him. John refused, reportedly at the request of Ozla, who said she wanted her abusive husband to learn a lesson. While in prison, Samuel told fellow inmates that he planned to murder his wife after his release. News of the danger reached Ozla in March. She told friends that a stranger had called to see her, told her he had just been released from prison, and said he had heard her husband declare he would take her to dinner when he was released, and that he would shoot her while she was not looking. Ozla was uncertain about the threat. She feared her husband would hurt her, but wasn't sure if he would kill her. She went to the jail to find the man who'd warned her, but could not remember his name. After being summoned as a witness for a street accident, Ozla told an official that she was scared of her husband. "What do you think of me? I have only been married since September, and I've had to have my husband sent to jail 3 times. Now he says he is going to kill me." Samuel Ron was released from prison on March 24, 1912. Hours after his release, he went to see his wife. However, she refused to speak to him, so he left. Samuel lived in the Lawrence Hotel, where his brother, John Ron, paid his bill for board and lodging. On March 28, Samuel went to see his wife again. This time, she agreed to see him. The two spoke for 4 hours. Samuel asked her to live with him again. The conversation eventually took an angry turn. When Ozla refused to reconcile with her husband, he told her, "Well, I'll say goodbye, for you will never see me again. I shall kill myself before morning." Ozla did not believe him. The next day, Samuel purchased a .32 caliber revolver. On the evening of March 30, Samuel, accompanied by his brother John, visited the house again. Ozla was jumping rope with several children. Samuel tried to talk with her again, but she refused. Soon, John came, and the 3 sat together on a porch. At some point, John spoke to her. Ozla was willing to talk to him. The two made small talk and laughed together. At this, Samuel fell into a silent, jealous rage. After they continued to talk, he rose up and said he was going to get a drink of water. Samuel returned with his revolver. He approached his wife, put his hand on her head, and shot her twice, once in the head and once in the chest. John immediately got up and tried to stop his brother, but Samuel shot him twice in the chest. One bullet pierced his heart. Officer Fitton of the 4th Precinct had been less than 40 feet away from the house when he heard the shots. However, Samuel fired them so quickly that the deed was done when he reached him. A fatally wounded John ran to the officer's side and fell at his feet. John tried to speak, but his voice was too weak to be understood. He collapsed and died a minute later. A crowd of hundreds of people gathered. Fearing he would be lynched, Samuel surrendered immediately and handed his gun to the officer. Coincidentally, Fitton was same police officer who'd arrested him for choking his wife in February. "I'm not going to run. Take me away quick. I'm going to be mobbed." A few minutes later, Samuel was in the patrol wagon on his way to the police station. At his cell that night, Samuel told the police that he had only one brother, their parents were dead, and he had no other near relatives to grieve his brother's death. Samuel expressed remorse only for the death of his brother. I love the girl, but the reason I shot her is between she and I. Tell me, is she dead? In response to the reporter saying yes, well, I'll regret I killed the boy every day I live. I saw him reach back as if he was going to draw a gun and I shot at his arms. I wanted to disable him. Still, he said he killed his brother in self-defense. When I left the workhouse, I went to see my brother. We had a few words and he told me that he would get me sometime. I knew he always carried a gun, and after that talk I began to carry mine. I met him on the avenue Friday and running my hand lightly down his side, discovered he had a gun with him. Saturday night, when I was sitting with my wife on the front step, John came along and sat down. My wife sat between us. They seemed to have a good bit to say to each other. John made several moves towards his back pocket, and I felt sure he was seeing whether his gun he could get at it. He had told me that he would get me and get me quick. Presently, I got up to get a drink of water and saw them nudge each and laugh as I was going into the house. John went back towards his pocket again. I stepped into the hallway and shifted my gun from my hip pocket to the right pocket of my coat. As I came out, John turned in his seat and made a move that looked bad to me. I jerked out my gun, shot my wife twice, and then put 2 bullets into my brother. Reading and whistling, Samuel was fairly unconcerned about his situation. The next day, he was taken from jail to testify before a coroner's jury. Yes, gentlemen, I killed my wife. I went there to do it and I did it. Here I am, but I did not mean to kill my brother. You see, it was like this. Here is what Samuel said. You see, it was like this, he repeated, rubbing his hands together. I told Polly, that's what I called her, that someday I would die for her, and here I am. I'm going to die for what I did, but there was something between us that will never come out. Saturday afternoon, I walked down from my room at the St. Lawrence to see Polly. I guess she didn't want to see me. When I got to 1016 7th Street, I saw her sitting on a little porch there. She got up and began skipping a rope. I say, Polly, I want to talk to you. I've heard something. She says to me, I guess you did all the talking last night. You're going to. I had been talking with her the night previous for 4 hours. Now, just as we were standing there, I saw my brother coming up the street. He saw me and I saw him. I say to Polly, so my brother's coming to see you, is he? And then he sat down by Polly. They were both on my left. She whispered something to him and he whispered something to her. I suppose they were planning to get rid of me. I say, Polly, you don't know what I'd do for you. I'd die for you. But she laughed. Then I went in the house, got my gun out of my pocket, came back, pressed her head down and fired twice. My brother always carried a gun, no, so when I saw him coming toward me, I let him have a bullet, which I aimed at his arm. I didn't mean to kill him, I meant to break his arm. Then I backed up, turned round, saw a policeman, reversed the gun in my hand and handed it to him. That's all except that I was smoking a cigarette when I shot them. I went to kill her and I did. She's better off now than ever before. On July 10, 1912, Samuel indicted for 2 counts of first-degree murder, then a capital offense under DC Code. Since Samuel could not afford a lawyer, 2 were appointed for him. A jury was impaneled on December 12, 1912. However, with the evidence of both guilt and premeditation being overwhelming, the defense was initially unsure how to help their client. Nearly all U.S. jurisdictions had set up degrees of murder by 1912. Some allowed the jury to recommend mercy under at least certain circumstances, a system that all jurisdictions would eventually adopt. However, Washington, D.C. would be the very last jurisdiction to adopt this system, only doing so in 1962. On December 16, 1912, Samuel Ron went on trial for his life. With no other way out, the defense pleaded temporary insanity in death of Olza and self-defense in the death of John. Anticipating the insanity defense, the prosecution brought in 3 psychiatrists to observe Samuel during the trial. At the start of the trial, the prosecution told the jury about Samuel's prior assault conviction. He said Ron, in a conversation with one of the guard, had threatened revenge on his wife and announced his intent to kill his brother. Several character witnesses testified for defense. All reported that Samuel had a good reputation in the military. They also confirmed that John Ron, a soldier himself, did in fact own a revolver. As for the other victim, defense attorney Ethelbert B. Frey went on to tell a very different story than Ozla had prior to her murder. Frey said Ozla had behaved badly on her honeymoon. When her husband protested, she tried to stab him with a butcher knife. After returning home, Samuel had seen a man going over the back fence. Ozla refused to say who the visitor was and threatened to attack her husband with a razor if he kept asking questions. Then, Frey said, Samuel had choked his wife in self-defense. After his release from prison, Samuel visited his wife's room, where he thought he heard the voice of his brother. Going into the room with a witness, Samuel had then discovered his wife and brother together. John threatened to kill him if he said anything about what he had just seen. Taking the stand, a nervous Samuel, talking in a broken voice, spoke of his insane love for his wife. "I loved her and would have stuck by her through health and sickness and everything." He accused his brother of being obsessed with his wife, preventing reconciliation, and helping furnish grounds for a divorce. He insisted that he had killed his wife in a moment of temporary insanity and killed his brother in self-defense. However, multiple witnesses said that Samuel's jealousy related to his brother had no basis in reality. John rarely interacted with Olza, and Samuel had been the one to take him to the home in the first place that day. In addition, Samuel had opened fire on his wife and brother without any immediate provocation. The trial ended on December 18. At the end of the trial, both psychiatrists concluded that Samuel was sane. After deliberating for 4 hours, the jury found Samuel Ron guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. On January 3, 1913, after a bid for a new trial was denied, Mr. Justice Stafford sentenced Samuel Ron to death by hanging. He ordered that his execution be carried out at the district jail on January 31, 1913. The defense did not appeal, instead seeking clemency from President Howard Taft. Samuel communicated relatives in Illinois and letters were written back. Several soldiers visited him in prison. On January 29, Samuel wrote 2 letters to the president, one asking for a pardon and another asking for a reprieve. Upon the recommendation of the Department of Justice, both were denied. By January 30, Samuel had lost all hope for a reprieve. He reasoned that if the president had any intention of intervening, he would not wait until the very last moment. That afternoon, Ethelbert B. Frey went to the White House and demanded to see the president. However, President Howard Taft was receiving delegates from a Sunday school convention, after which he planned to play golf. Refusing to give up, Frey pretended to be one of the delegates. It worked, and he was able to meet with the president. Frey begged the president to spare Samuel's life. President Taft initially refused, saying his decision was final, but later had second thoughts as he was golfing. After returning to the White House, he signed a reprieve for Samuel. President Taft granted the reprieve, give the young man more time to prepare for his death. He issued the reprieve to Samuel in a moment of compassion and out of admiration for how determined Frey had been to save the life of his client, Mr. Frey had then asked if he could show extenuating circumstances within the next 2 weeks that would warrant clemency and whether they could be heard out. President Taft agreed to hear him out. For Samuel, the reprieve was met with relief. "That's good news. I have felt it all along. I'm glad you ended my suspense, for I was getting a little bit worried. I guess I'll sleep pretty sound tonight. 2 weeks, eh? Well, that's mighty good news." Samuel Ron was scheduled to be executed on February 14, 1913, alongside William H. Sabins, another soldier who had been convicted of another murder committed under virtually identical circumstances. On August 14, 1911, Sabins, 27, shot and killed his ex-girlfriend, 22-year-old Ada Haynes, in a jealous rage after learning that she was planning to marry another man. According to friends of Haynes, Sabins had been fixated on her for months. Last week, he tried to see her, but she turned him away since she was afraid of him. Sabins told several people he was going to kill Ada. That evening, Sabins slipped into Ada's house behind 2 other men. 2 maids told him to leave, but he went to the dining room. There, Ada was showing her friends a photo of herself with her fiancé. Sabins drew a revolver and shot Ada in the chest. The other women fled screaming. A man tuning a nearby piano tried to disarm Sabins, but he shot Ada again, this time in the cheek. He then tried to shoot himself, but missed and hit the ceiling. Found amongst the dead woman's belongings was a letter from her fiancé, George. "Dear Ada, a few lines to my dear to tell her I am well. I am writing this at my sister's. I told her I was going to marry you. Although we are far between, I love you just the same and always will, Ada. I will love none other, and you know I am not false, and I hope you will remain true. I will write more as soon as I hear from you. Yours always." On June 28, 1912, Sabins, who also pleaded insanity, was convicted first-degree murder and sentenced to death. However, on February 6, 1913, Sabins won a stay of execution since he was appealing. On June 10, 1913, he was granted a new trial. A retrial was granted on the grounds that the prosecution was wrong to tell the jury to assume that Sabins, who was drunk at the time of the murder, had intentionally gotten himself drunk to prepare his nerves. They said that this should have been left up to the jury. S. Senator Ollie James and Representative Andrew James Thomas, both from Sabins' home state of Kentucky, had both previously petitioned for clemency from President Woodrow W. Wilson on his behalf. Many people in his home county signed a clemency petition. In the end, it wouldn't be necessary. Realizing that this was his best and likely only chance to avoid execution, Sabins negotiated a plea agreement. On October 24, 1913, Sabins pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. After a plea for leniency from his attorney, Chief Justice Clabaugh sentenced Sabins to 30 years in prison. In 1915, Sabins wrote a letter from prison in which he pleaded for clemency. He said he had a rough life and was neither a violent nor bloodthirsty person. On February 11, 1913, President Taft said he would not further interfere in the Ron case. In the end, despite a dramatic last-minute reprieve from the President of the United States, justice, as it was defined in 1913, was coming for Samuel Ron. The story of Ozla is an absolute tragedy because it was so predictable. Samuel Ron told everyone, from his cellmates to Ozla herself, what he was going to do. He even told the police he was a danger. This case is a chilling reminder of how a cycle of abuse, fueled by jealousy and entitlement, can escalate with horrifying speed, leaving devastation in its wake. It's a story from over a century ago, but the patterns of abuse and the cries for help are timeless. Thank you for joining me to remember Ozla and her tragic, innocent brother-in-law, John. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.